The original Jurassic Park is one of the most iconic films of all time, and that's largely due to the amazing cast of characters and actors. Each character and their respective actor is unique and iconic, but they're quite a bit different from their novel variants. So let's go over all the important characters one at a time so I can show you what I mean. Dr. Alan Grant is the main character of the original Jurassic Park, and despite Sam Neill's amazing portrayal of the character, he's still quite a bit different in the novels than in the films. In the novels, Grant is described as a barrel-chested, bearded man of 40. He and Ellie are not involved romantically in the novel. In fact, she's just his student, and he had a wife that died many years prior to the events of the novel. But despite these differences, just like the film, he gets to display his paleontology knowledge quite often. He's the one who confirms that dinosaurs are breeding on the island when he discovers a velociraptor eggshell. Throughout the novel, he also identifies several dinosaur behavioral patterns, like the Maiasaurus when they're eating, and the Tyrannosaurus when it's hunting. Grant also gets what's probably the best solo scene in the whole novel. At one point, he gets cornered by velociraptors in Dr. Wu's laboratory, 3 of them. Equipped with the knowledge that most small carnivorous dinosaurs likely ate eggs, as well as the fact that most of them likely have a chasing instinct, he was able to use poison to kill all 3 of the raptors. He managed to convince 2 of them to eat the poisoned eggs, but at the end, the 3rd one got a little hairy. But through Grant's quick thinking, he managed to save himself by injecting the poison directly into the raptor's tail. And at the end of the novel, he and Ellie deduce that the raptors and other dinosaurs are trying to migrate off the island, and it's very likely that some have gotten off already. Oh, and in the novel, he doesn't dislike kids. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He has quite an affinity for them, especially Tim and Lex once he gets to know them. Either way, both versions of Dr. Grant are legendary characters. Grant survives throughout the whole novel, and just like in the films, he continues his career of paleontology despite his horrific encounters. In the original Jurassic Park, Ellie Sattler is the partner of Alan Grant and also a paleobotanist who works with him. In the novel, Ellie is still a paleobotanist, but she's not romantically involved with Dr. Grant whatsoever, as I mentioned previously. But she still worked relatively closely with Dr. Grant, prompting Hammond to invite her to the island as well. And despite not being romantically involved, her and Alan are very close friends and respect each other incredibly. And for good reason too. Ellie is more than capable of handling herself, and aside from that, she's probably one of the smartest people in the whole novel. I had mentioned previously that Alan had found and identified the velociraptor egg, but in the novel he never would have found that egg if it wasn't for Ellie. If you remember the sick Triceratops from the Jurassic Park film, in the novel that was actually a sick Stegosaurus. In both the film and the novel, the dinosaurs are getting sick from consuming a berry from a plant known as West Indian lilac. The park staff insisted that the dinosaurs weren't eating the West Indian lilac, but Ellie thought otherwise and did some investigating. Turns out, unbeknownst to Hammond and the others, the dinosaurs were consuming gizzard stones, and when they ate the gizzard stones, they accidentally ate the berries as well. And just like in the film, Ellie gets to be the hero that the men won't be. She's able to distract the raptors long enough for Grant, Gennaro, and the kids to get the power back on. She does this by using herself as bait and going outside and banging on the fence to get the raptors to attack her at the fence line. Though it doesn't all go exactly to plan, and Ellie ends up having to run for her life. But her plan worked, and that's what we're focusing on here. You may have noticed that I didn't mention Ellie's appearance at all. And that's because the only real difference appearance-wise is that Ellie in the books is much tanner than Ellie in the movies. Ellie is one of the survivors of the novel, and she ends up going on to marry a physicist later on. Ian Malcolm, much like Grant and Sattler, is one of the big 3 main characters of the original Jurassic Park. He's meant to serve as the voice of the audience throughout the novel, similar to the movie. The only real difference of appearance is that Malcolm in the book is balding, versus Malcolm in the films is definitely not. Malcolm is a rather enigmatic personality, and he's very pessimistic about the park as a whole. And I think the best part is that he's actually not really opposed to the idea of Jurassic Park, he's opposed to Hammond's methods. In the novel, Malcolm makes it very clear that he doesn't trust Hammond and doesn't think Hammond did this the right way. He believes that Hammond and Wu are foolish and don't fully understand what they're trying to do. Throughout the novel, he points out Wu's and Hammond's flawed methodology. The whole dinosaurs can't breed thing didn't sit right with Malcolm, which is where we get this famous line.
Life, finds a way.
In the novel, he expands upon this by explaining that there's way too many unpredictable factors when working with animals that the world has not seen in millions of years. Before I continue, let's just take a moment to appreciate Jeff Goldblum. This is one of his most iconic characters, and I doubt anyone could have played him as well as Goldblum. Being a kid meant Alan Grant was your favorite, but being an adult means that Ian Malcolm is your favorite. Unfortunately for this brilliant character, for most of the film and the novel, he's incapacitated. In the novel, after watching the Tyrannosaur throw the kid's car, he runs in a panic. The Tyrannosaur ends up chasing him, biting down onto his leg, and tossing him like a rag doll. In the film, this occurred slightly differently. And that's once again thanks to the wonderful Jeff Goldblum. He thought it would be a better idea that instead of Ian running away scared, that he actually tries to help Alan and save the kids. Which is why he gets his very heroic moment in the Tyrannosaur scene of the movie. Malcolm ends up spending the rest of the novel ranting about science and philosophy, and he helps to explain to the reader the complexity of the chaos that has unfolded throughout the park. Unfortunately, at the end of the novel, it's said that Malcolm dies of his injuries. But Crichton retconned that for the second novel, per request of Spielberg. They explained this by saying that the paramedics that had found him had declared him dead, but when he arrived in Costa Rica, he was taken to a hospital and was able to be treated there. And thus the legend of Malcolm got to continue. The creator of Jurassic Park is none other than John Hammond. In the films, Hammond is a rather likable character, often compared to Walt Disney. But you may be surprised to learn that he's actually considered the main antagonist of the novel. In the films, he's portrayed like a sweet old man who just wants to bring the joy of dinosaurs to the whole world. In the novel, that's just his public persona and what he shows to characters like Alan Grant. And throughout the novel, we learn that this isn't the case and that Hammond only cares about money. In fact, the only reason he starts the Jurassic Park project so late in his life is to shore up his legacy and make as much money as he can before he dies. There's a point in the novel where he discusses with Wu other bioengineering companies like InGen. He explains that many of them are attempting to help mankind by doing things like curing diseases. He said that he personally would never use bioengineering to help mankind because it's too much of a risky business and he doesn't want to risk those profits and government regulations. Throughout the entirety of the novel, Hammond takes no responsibility for any of the issues that come up with the park, instead blaming them on other people. The novel version of Hammond would have sacrificed his grandchildren to the dinosaurs if he thought it would make him more profit. And like many villains, Hammond got what he deserved. After most of the conflict had ended and the park was mostly settling down, Hammond went on a walk. While he was on this walk, Tim and Lex were in the control room messing around, and they found a button that played a Tyrannosaurus roar. This roar ended up terrifying Hammond, causing him to dive into the nearest foliage. Doing so causes Hammond to fall down a hill and break his ankle. And as he's trying to get back up the hill, he's found and bitten by compies. The compies in Jurassic Park have a type of venom that causes a sense of euphoria in its victim. And after the venom got into Hammond's system, he basically let the compies eat him. And I know it sounds kind of gruesome, but Hammond honestly deserved way worse. Don't be a sociopathic megalomaniac, kids. Lex and Tim Murphy are two key characters in Jurassic Park. In both versions, they're Hammond's grandchildren. But aside from that fact, there's quite a few differences in these characters. In the novel, Tim is the older sibling instead of Lex. And aside from having enough dinosaur knowledge to rival that of Dr. Grant, he also was a genius when it came to computers in the books. Now, that may sound familiar, and that's because that aspect of his personality was given to Lex for the movie. This was done in order to strengthen Lex's character, and in all honesty, it was a good call. Lex is about 7 or 8 in the novel, and she's a typical kid. And a lot of people don't like her character because they find her annoying in the novels. Which isn't entirely unwarranted because she does put the group in danger in several occasions. But personally, I think the people that don't like her are missing the point. She's a literal child. Children are not always the smartest and they don't know what's best to do in most bad situations. And any real child that had experienced what Lex had would be absolutely terrified, just like she was. It should honestly be more surprising to you how well Tim handles everything for a boy of only 11 years old. My point is that she's a kid, so you gotta stop being mad at her for doing things that a normal kid would do. Tim and his little glasses, on the other hand, I mean, he might be dangerous. I mean, this man manages to remain rational while a raptor comes into the kitchen, just like in the film. In the books, only a single raptor entered the kitchen. And it wasn't really just a kitchen, it was kind of like a whole dining area. And using frozen steaks, he managed to lure the velociraptor into the freezer, where he slammed the door shut on it. A little less daring than the movie, to be sure, but a lot more clever. Tim also has a very father-son-esque relationship with Dr. Grant because his own father doesn't really like him all that much. In Dr. Grant's words, it's hard to not like somebody so interested in dinosaurs, which is a sentiment that I share. And Tim is also essential to one of the major plot lines that's omitted from the film. At one point, Tim sees a raptor outside of the fence, and later on, him and Lex both spot raptors on a boat leaving the island. The raptors were all juvenile, it's part of the whole dinosaurs escaping plotline. I'm not going to get into that now. The point is, these kids saw the raptors on the boat, and it's only because of them that they ended up getting stopped. By the end of the novel, Tim's pretty much the only one who can work the park systems, and he's the one who turned the power back on. Kids can be pretty amazing, right? In Jurassic Park, Henry Wu is the man behind the dinosaurs. In the first Jurassic Park film, Wu doesn't have a giant role, but he is the chief geneticist of Jurassic Park. In fact, a good chunk of Wu's original lines went to Mr. DNA. But Wu survives the first film and ends up going on to be much more of a mad scientist in the later Jurassic World films. But like many of these characters, he had a much more prominent role in the novels. In the novels, Wu was approached by Hammond after the funeral of his mentor. His mentor had always called Wu the best geneticist in his lab, and as such, Hammond offered him $10 million a year to, in Hammond's words, take a crack at the impossible. And for reference, that's equal to about $22.7 million in today's money. Wu took the job, and after years of research, he managed to recreate the dinosaurs just as Hammond wanted. But later on, Wu became disillusioned with his own work. As Malcolm had said, Wu and Hammond didn't really fully understand the power they were working with. Ellie's words actually work perfectly here.
We have control again.
You've never had control. That's the illusion.
Wu's belief that he was in control drove him to the point that he even believed he could make better versions of the dinosaurs. He could make them slower, more docile, more what he thought people had expected, because back then people didn't view dinosaurs as large, fast-moving animals. And that alone really goes to show the arrogance that Malcolm was talking about. In Malcolm's own words, they stood on the shoulders of geniuses and took the next step, and they didn't have any idea what they were doing because of it. It's just like that one saying. A person who has learned the ability to kill with their bare hands has also learned the discipline to not do it indiscriminately. And that is precisely what Malcolm is getting at with Wu and Hammond. And I think that's a great metaphor to show how lost Wu really is. He has these amazing skills, but doesn't know how to use them properly, and that's partially the reason why the park fails. Wu unfortunately starts to have doubts about the park a little too late in his life. After helping Grant get the power back on, he goes to get Ellie back inside the building. As he's attempting to do so, he gets yanked out the door by a velociraptor and split down the middle. As the raptor began to eat Wu, he was still alive, feebly pushing its head away from his intestines. So in the book series, Wu didn't get to live long enough to become a megalomaniac villain. Don't go full mad scientist. You never want to go full mad scientist. John Arnold is the chain-smoking chief engineer of Jurassic Park. Seemingly pessimistic on the outside, you may be surprised to know that Arnold was more of an optimist. In both the book and the film, despite all the failings of the park, he still manages to think he can bring it all back under control. And though extremely hesitant, it's through this belief that he actually shuts down the power to the remaining portions of the park. But in the novel, when he turns the power back on, it's not revealed until many hours later that they were actually running on auxiliary power, which was now extremely low. And because the park was running on auxiliary power, it was only diverting energy to the necessary systems, which they had discovered had shut off the raptor paddock. Arnold felt a sense of responsibility for what had happened, so he volunteered to go turn the power back on at the shed. It was here that he was chased and killed by a velociraptor. And it's actually the same death his character gets in the film as well. In fact, Arnold was supposed to have a rather lengthy death scene where he was chased and killed by the velociraptors in the film. But that scene unfortunately had to be cut because the set they needed was destroyed by Hurricane Iniki. And honestly, Arnold's biggest flaw is his faith in the wrong things. And unfortunately for him, in both the film and the book, it costs him his life. Donald Gennaro is the character with probably the most differences between the book and the film for Jurassic Park. In the film, Gennaro is skinny, balding, and grumpy, which is 1 out of 3, so not bad. However, in the novel, he's described as a short, muscular man, and he's supposed to be kind of a stand-in for the everyday working man. In both pieces of media, Gennaro serves as Jurassic Park's lawyer. He's sent by Jurassic Park investors to inspect and investigate the island to ensure it's safe, as they've lost several workers already. And unlike his counterpart who dies on the toilet, Gennaro actually survives the book. He's actually not even with the group when they get attacked by the Tyrannosaur. That's actually Ed Regis. Instead, Gennaro stays behind with Dr. Sattler and Dr. Harding to keep an eye on the 6th Stegosaurus before they all head back to the visitor center. For most of the central portions of the novel, Gennaro serves as Muldoon's sidekick. He assists Muldoon when he goes to save the others and ends up helping Muldoon save Malcolm. He also manages to get Muldoon to safety when they both go to take down the Tyrannosaur. And he also helps Muldoon kill a raptor by being the one to load his rocket launcher. And after all that's said and done, he's tasked with trying to go and restart the power. He doesn't succeed because in the process, he's attacked by the same raptor that attacked John Arnold. It seems that in its scuffle with Arnold, the raptor had managed to hurt itself, so when it landed on Gennaro, Gennaro managed to actually throw the raptor off of him. And while he's unsuccessful in killing the raptor and the raptor ends up injuring Gennaro some more, he narrowly escapes into a nearby truck. And Gennaro was actually the final nail in the coffin that got the ship carrying the raptors to stop, as I mentioned earlier with Tim and Lex. And despite all that struggle, my man still manages to get off the island alive, only to die of dysentery sometime later. What kind of Oregon Trail bullshit? Dennis Nedry is the disgruntled project manager of Jurassic Park and is in charge of creating the park's computer systems. In the film, he serves as the primary antagonist, but in the novel, he's actually more of a secondary antagonist. And honestly, Nedry's a lot more human in the books than in the films. In the film, Nedry shut down the park and stole the embryos simply because he was selfish and wanted more money. And sure, Hammond's definitely not the greatest boss in the film, but to say he deserves the corporate espionage is definitely not warranted. But in the novels, it's a whole nother story. When Nedry was first approached by Hammond and InGen, he was asked to design a module specifically for record keeping. Along the way, Hammond and InGen also contracted him to create the rest of the computer system for Jurassic Park. Nedry was always in the dark about the project, never had the full scope in sight, and because of that he was left continually frustrated with all the changes he had to make. Eventually, Hammond and InGen wanted more changes that were not in the original contract as well. When Nedry asked for more money in exchange, they threatened litigations and lawsuits. They also wrote letters to Nedry's other clients, insinuating that he was becoming unreliable. And to stop any more loss on his part, he agreed to their demands. And it's because of this that when Dodgson offers Nedry $1.5 million to steal the 15 embryos, he eagerly accepts. And just like in the film, he shuts down the park to give himself a wide enough window to steal the embryos and deliver them to Dodgson's guy on the boat. And I'd like to clarify, I'm by no means saying what Nedry did was right. I'm just saying that if you got screwed out of thousands of dollars, maybe even more, then you'd be pretty pissed too. And Nedry still gets his comeuppance and gets killed by the Dilophosaurus in the novel. But honestly, it's a much more brutal death than he really deserved. Ed Regis is like the dark side of Donald Gennaro. Regis is a character that doesn't appear in the film, and that's because most of his lines and his position is given to Donald Gennaro. In the novel, he's head of public relations for Jurassic Park, but he's usually given a lot of odd jobs from Hammond. He honestly may as well be Hammond's trash guy because he has to clean up all of the guy's messes. Whenever there's any menial tasks, they get passed off to Regis. During his time in the novel, he ends up being the kid's babysitter for the tour portion of it. And over the course of time, he became just as sloppy and negligent as his boss. But once the Tyrannosaur breaks out, all the overconfidence he had completely disappears. Just like the film version of Gennaro, Regis runs out of the car for his life. Of course, that means he abandoned the children in the process. During the entirety of Rexy's attack, Regis runs down a hill and hides in between some boulders. After being scared by some leeches, he starts the hike back to the visitor center, believing everybody else had died. But then, all of a sudden, he hears Lex calling out, and he decides he should go back to the cars instead. But unfortunately, him trying to do the right thing is what ends up getting him killed. On his way back to Grant and the others, he's forced to hide when he hears the juvenile Tyrannosaur. It was still a young creature, and it toyed with him, almost like playing with its food. And while Regis still did almost manage to escape, at the last moment it pounces on him before he can go into hiding, and it kills him. And his severed leg is later discovered by Gennaro and Muldoon. He wasn't a great person, but he still tried to do the right thing in the end, so he at least earned some points back in my book. I've talked about the difference between Robert Muldoon in both the book and the film in a previous video. I'll give you a quick rundown of some of the major points, but if you want to learn more, go check out that video. Muldoon is nearly the same character, but he doesn't die in the book. He's got hair, including a pretty strapping mustache. And instead of a shotgun, he's got this neat little rocket launcher. Oh, and he's a pretty heavy drunk in the book as well. So yeah, definitely pretty different overall. After Jurassic World Dominion, Dodgson's probably a name you already know. Just like in the film, he only has a minor role, serving to hire Nedry, but he does have a little bit more time in the book. We get a scene with Dodgson before he hires Nedry in the book. He has quite a way with words, and he manages to convince the board of directors of Biosyn to allow him to steal the dinosaur embryos from InGen. Some of the highlights of the speech include merchandising like t-shirts and stuff like that, a worldwide zoo franchise, and pets. And of course pet food that you could only buy from InGen. And of course, them being greedy businessmen allowed Dodgson to do what he wanted. And as such, he hired Nedry to steal the 15 embryos from InGen. Jerry Harding is one of the unsung heroes of Jurassic Park. Jerry is the head of the veterinary staff at Jurassic Park, and he's the one who cares for all the animals. In fact, John Arnold said that Harding and his team were the only ones that ever regularly went out into the park. This man and his crew were the definition of boots on the ground for Jurassic Park, and unfortunately they really did him dirty in the movie. Harding only appears in one scene of the movie, where he incorrectly diagnoses the sick Triceratops. In the novel, he was treating a Stegosaurus, and while it was kind of a similar situation, I gotta give him a little leeway on this one. He was never allowed to fully do his job sometimes, and because of that, he couldn't investigate certain things. Thanks to Ellie, he was able to diagnose what was going on with the animals and help to treat them. And the next time we see the Stegosaurus in the novel, it's quite healthy and does a good job of annoying Tim. Before working at Jurassic Park, Harding was the leading expert on avian care throughout the world, and he was also the chief of veterinary medicine at the San Diego Zoo. Being the only medical doctor of any kind on the island, he was the one who had to treat Malcolm's wounds. And he did as best as he could with that with the limited resources available to him. And he also accidentally distracts a raptor long enough for Ellie to escape, but he almost gets killed in the process, so you know, that's a give and take. But Harding is one of the lucky survivors, and he manages to go home to his daughter Sarah. Martin Gutierrez is one of the characters not seen in the Jurassic Park film. In the novels, there's a whole plot line where dinosaurs are managing to get off the island, like compies. In an early scene of the novel, a compy attacks a young girl. This happens on a beach in Costa Rica called Cabo Blanco. Compies in the book are venomous, and it causes some sort of reaction on Tina's arm. When Gutierrez and his associate Dr. Cruz first assessed Tina, they believed she had an allergic reaction to a bite from a creature known as a basilisk lizard. However, Tina describes the creature that attacked her looked much different from a basilisk lizard, and because he notes how observant she is, he decides to take her word for it. He goes back to the same beach, and he ends up discovering a howler monkey that had partially eaten a compy. Despite being partially eaten, he can easily identify that this is the animal that attacked Tina. He ends up sending the sample along with a picture that Tina drew to a lab. After that lab grew suspicious, they ended up sending the sample to Dr. Grant, which is partially what convinces him and Ellie to actually go investigate this matter further. Gutierrez isn't seen again until the end of the novel after this point, where he tells Dr. Grant that large lizard-like creatures have been spotted in the jungles of Costa Rica, and he was the one who originally discovered that dinosaurs had actually gotten off the island. As you can see, there's quite a few differences between the Jurassic Park novels and films. Some for better, some for worse, and some kinda in between. I probably won't make another Jurassic Park video for a little while, but you guys let me know, should I do it on the differences between the dinosaurs from the book and the film next, or should I do the differences between the plot from the book and the film? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe down below, it helps me out a ton. And I'll see you guys in the next one.